The clerical mishap that triggered the entire incident began with a sleep-deprived junior registrar named Yith Nalorum, who was 3 rotations behind on his workload and riding a dangerous high from his 6th synth calf ration. Species classification, Terran enrollment, approved program, xenocultural evolution studies, special accommodations, none listed, verification status, unconfirmed. No one thought to check what Terran actually meant. That kind of oversight was rare at the Arcade Institute of Interspecies Studies, an orbital university hailed across 4 sectors for its radical inclusivity, terrifying cafeteria options, and notoriously difficult fieldwork modules. The institute was located in high orbit above the verdant moon of Kiroth 6, suspended within a floating lattice of zero-G research towers, plasma-framed arboretums, and translational campuses designed to accommodate nearly every known form of locomotion. One entire wing was underwater. Another was filled with methane and policed by vacuum drones. Somewhere in the core, a sentient fungal colony held tenure in the philosophy department. On a clear orbital cycle, students could see the rings of Velnar streaking across the atmosphere like silver brushstrokes. There were 1,102 currently enrolled species, give or take a few quantum-anchored enrollees from the Temporan continuum, who existed out of sync with most course timetables. Among this menagerie of minds were crystalline beings who conversed by altering their light spectra, amorphous gas intelligences who floated in portable resonance fields, rooted macrofauna who required 3 translators just to discuss basic ethics, and the Drexari, who hissed violently if anyone sat too close or breathed in the wrong direction. And then there was Casey Hart, a human. She walked into Lecture Dome C7 on a standard 5th-day morning, wearing scuffed boots, a loose backpack slung over one shoulder, and a large ceramic mug that smelled like it had been forged in a chemical weapons lab. The mug featured a cartoon animal with pointed ears, wearing mirrored sunglasses. The caption read, "Don't talk to me until I've reached low orbit." "Sorry I'm late," she said casually, slipping into a half-empty row near the center of the amphitheater. The orbital shuttle hit some plasma turbulence. To her left sat a lanky Kevelin, a reflective quadruped with 8 independent eyes and a polite metallic clicking language. To her right, a Thoric, essentially a sentient moss colony wearing a woven hydration cloak, shifted colors in alarm and emitted a defensive puff of spores. Casey didn't notice. She took a long sip of her drink, cracked open an actual paper notebook, and began to doodle something with far too many teeth. At the front of the hall stood Professor Lorat, a high-ranking Ravari tri-mind, whose 3 conjoined brains enabled him to multitask with frightening efficiency. He had taught courses while simultaneously piloting research drones and filing departmental expense reports. Lorat barely looked up at the interruption. Another late student. Another day. The semester was still young. The danger, in his view, would come later, during the oral exams. "As I was saying," Lorat continued, his 3-part voice resonating through the lecture field, "today we begin our module on the emergence of apex predators within sapient evolutionary pathways, particularly as they appear on class-red biomes." The lights dimmed. A star chart hovered in the air, slowly rotating. "Most intelligent species originate from Class G worlds," Lorat lectured. "Those with breathable atmospheres, manageable fauna, and predictable weather. Temperate gravity, temperate climates, a reasonable amount of volcanism. You know, polite planets." Several students chuckled. The Kavalan student to Casey's left clicked a staccato note of amusement. "But there are exceptions," the professor intoned. "Worlds so hostile that survival is not only unlikely, it's mathematically absurd." He gestured, and the star map zoomed toward the outer galactic fringe. "We call these red zone biospheres." Casey paused mid-doodle, raising an eyebrow. The name sounded vaguely familiar. "There are only a handful," Lorat said. "Most harbor nothing more complex than microbial extremophiles. One, however." He tapped a control. The map focused on a small, otherwise unimpressive yellow star system. "Produced civilization." Gasps echoed through the hall. A few of the more aquatic species made bubbling sounds of disbelief. "Sol," said Lorat. "Third planet, Earth. Or, as the registry still calls it, Terra." Casey's pen paused. "This planet," Lorat continued, "features tectonic instability, an erratic climate system, regional megafauna, and an atmospheric composition that would be lethal to 92% of known oxygen-processing species." He waved a hand, and the display shifted. Tornadoes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, dust storms, predator footage, massive herd animals stampeding across plains. "And yet," Lorat said, his tone growing clinical, "sapient life did not merely survive, it thrived." Casey stopped doodling entirely. Professor Lorat tapped the air again, and the star field faded, replaced by an image of Earth's surface. Deserts the size of small nations, hurricane systems with eyes wider than cities, and dense jungle biomes that could swallow a research team whole. "And yet," he said, "against all survival models, this world produced sapient apex predators, self-aware, tool-using, culture-forming." He turned, eyes narrowing as if addressing the hologram itself. "The Terrans call themselves humans." Casey sipped her coffee. "Current biological data suggests that humans evolved not in harmony with their environment, but in defiance of it," Lorat said, sounding almost offended. "The dominant species on Sol 3 is an omnivorous persistence predator. It cannot outrun most prey, so it simply follows them until the prey gives up or dies." A thoric in the front row released a small distress puff. "Moreover," the professor continued, "humans are chemically modulated. Their bodies release a hormone cocktail, adrenaline, in response to threat stimuli. This boosts physical capacity well beyond baseline." The Kevlin next to Casey shifted, and one of its eyes turned toward her mug with what could only be called suspicion. "Some specimens," Lorat added, voice low now, "have demonstrated survival in environments that would sterilize standard species. Extremes of heat, cold, pressure, deprivation, impact." He paused dramatically, as if savoring the next fact. "There are recorded cases of humans continuing to function despite broken bones, deep lacerations, and blood loss. Their species possesses a highly redundant circulatory system and an immune response that actively hunts invading pathogens internally with chemical warfare." At this, several students turned to glance at Casey. She blinked back. The professor continued, "And perhaps most unsettling of all, they consider these features unremarkable, standard." Casey raised her hand. The motion was so casual that half the class flinched. "Yes, Ms. Hart?" Lorat said cautiously. She hesitated. You said humans pursue prey until it collapses? That is the accepted model, yes. What happens if the prey turns and fights back? A few students exchanged nervous glances. Lorat looked mildly intrigued. Well, one assumes the humans would employ tools, weapons, strategy. Casey shook her head. No, I mean hand to hand. If they had to fight something bigger, stronger. There was a pause. Well, Lorat said, in theory, the adrenaline response and pain tolerance would allow temporary resistance, but individual combat against a larger predator would be inadvisable. Even with training? Casey asked. Another pause. Lorat tilted his head, tri-lobed cranium flexing thoughtfully. Training in what context? Martial arts, combat disciplines, stress conditioning. I suppose it's possible, the professor said slowly. Casey nodded. Cool. Just curious. Lorat made a small note on his pad. Beside him, his second brain quietly messaged, Administration. Subject. Student verification request. Possible classification. Mismatch. Current individual exhibits. Curious level of biological familiarity. Request immediate species audit. Across the room, the Kivalin student leaned slightly away from Casey. The Thoric had already begun photosynthesizing nervously. The alert reached the central administrative tower 10 minutes later, arriving on a secure channel tagged Non-Immediate Curiosity Threat, Orange. Dean Sail Viren, a towering bipedal Velothi, read the message twice before her left eye began to twitch involuntarily. It was short. Possible human. Currently seated in Lecture Dome C7, asking very specific questions. Appears calm. Send help. She toggled her comm. Emergency services. Activate Protocol 7. A brief silence. Ma'am, replied her assistant, a frazzled aquatic intern named Mech. Protocol 7 is reserved for interdimensional anomalies. Dean Viren pinched the bridge of her nasal ridge. And this student casually discussed surviving volcanic winters. Still, Protocol 7? Fine. Call it Protocol 7E. 7ME doesn't exist. Then start writing it. Meanwhile, Casey Hart was wandering the campus with a half-folded map and a mild caffeine buzz. Her translator implant was still chewing through the local dialects, which meant all signage might as well have been written in stylized tentacles. She passed a courtyard featuring a levitating meditation orb, a sunlit rock garden maintained by gravitational inversion, and a statue labeled In Memoriam Dr. Zelv, lost to theoretical geometry. Eventually, she stopped a group of students clustered around a hydration node. Hey, sorry, could you point me toward the nearest bathroom? The group, a mix of feathery Zunari and gelatinous Brathlians, stared at her for a solid 3 seconds, then scattered like spooked birds. Huh, Casey said, watching them flee. That's not ominous at all. Back in the administrative wing, panic was spreading faster than the air filtration system could handle. Dean Viren paced in tight, fast circles. We need containment. Quiet, subtle, and immediate. No disruption, no campus-wide alarms. Assistant Mech stared at the incoming security feed. She's currently in the Central Plaza, drinking coffee, just coffee. The dean rubbed both temples. Coffee, of course. The toxin brew. Mech squinted. Is she Smiling at passers-by? Terrifying. A second ping came through. The xenobiology department had dispatched Professor Lauret, 2 security officers, and a civilian research specialist. Their objective: gently assess threat level. Viren activated a side feed. On screen, Casey was attempting to decipher a multilingual vending unit, while a nearby Farron fainted mid-bite of nutrition gel. "She's not even trying to scare them," the dean muttered. "That's the worst part." What should we do? Contain her, question her, and, stars help us, do not upset her. Mech swallowed. Define upset? "If she asks to see the syllabus," Dean Viren said grimly, "we give her full tenure." The Arquette Institute's Central Nutritional Hall was a marvel of interspecies engineering, a floating, ring-shaped complex segmented by environmental compatibility and dietary chemistry. In one quadrant, gaseous species absorbed vaporized mineral mist in high-pressure chambers. In another, silicon-based life forms bathed in nutrient gel pools under calibrated starlight. The photosynthetics had their own sun lounge deck with mood lighting and a curated playlist of slow wind chimes. Humanoids, or, more generously, those with mouths and questionable taste, ate in the general carbon-based zone. Casey Hart walked in, grabbed a tray, and tried to look casual about it. The food selection didn't inspire confidence. Shimmering blue paste, lumpy yellow cylinders, something that looked like it had opinions about being eaten. A vat of purple noodles glowed faintly. She looked to the Kievaline in front of her in the serving line. "Hey," she asked, "is the purple stuff any good?" The Kievaline took one look at her, made a flat, metallic clicking noise, and promptly collapsed in a heap of retreating limbs. "I'll take that as a no," Casey muttered, picking the purple noodles anyway. She found an empty table near the observation windows, not because she wanted to be alone. She just didn't want to scare anyone by sitting too close. Again. Around her, conversations muted. Movement slowed. A ring of conspicuously empty tables widened, like a gravitational anomaly forming around a black hole in gym shorts and boots. From 3 tables away, a group of Vorshai students huddled over their nutrient bricks. "Look at it," one hissed in subsonics. "Just eating." "Maybe it doesn't know what it is," whispered another. "Maybe it thinks it's one of us." "That's worse," said a third. "That means it's learning." 20 minutes later, Professor Lauret entered the hall with 2 security officers and Dr. Rivra, the head of the Institute's Department of High-Risk Species Research. They spotted Casey instantly, partly because she was the only student surrounded by a 3-meter buffer zone of fear, partly because she was humming to herself and cheerfully eating glowing noodles. "That's the human," Lauret said under his breath. Dr. Rivra adjusted her scanner, keeping a respectful distance. She was a Chirathi, a species known for discretion, analytical rigor, and hiding behind larger people during field expeditions. "External appearance suggests standard bipedal life form," she murmured. "No natural armor, no visible weapons. Muscle density appears moderate." She asked what would happen if prey fought back. Lauret said grimly, "Without tools." The scanner beeped ominously. "Professor," Rivra said, "are you absolutely sure this specimen is from Sol 3? "It introduced itself as a Terran," Lauret said. "Asked about red zone apex predators. Had a paper notebook." Paper. Dr. Rivra's scanner beeped louder. Then it screeched. Then it shut down entirely, with a flicker of sparks and a plume of disappointment. Casey looked up and waved cheerfully. "Oh, hey, Professor! Great lecture earlier, very dramatic. Loved the Death World stuff." Dr. Rivra stared down at her fried scanner, then up at the smiling human. "That's it," she muttered. "I'm requisitioning a hazard bonus." One of the security officers, a heavily armored Drogaran who had wrestled apex fauna in hostile jungles, leaned toward Lorat. "Professor," he rumbled, "she's eating the purple noodles." Lorat stiffened. "But those are synthesized for iron-rich, high-acid metabolisms. No one eats those voluntarily." "She asked if they were good," the Drogaran said. "I think she's reviewing them." Across the room, Casey took another bite and nodded thoughtfully. "Kind of tastes like sour bubble gum and regret," she said aloud. "Weirdly addictive." By the time Casey Hart was escorted to the administrative concourse, high-risk processing, the Institute's faculty had initiated silent lockdown procedures, quarantined the cafeteria, and issued 4 conflicting memos titled "Be Calm." "Absolutely do not engage, smile at the human, and never show your teeth." Dean Sailviren had cleared her schedule, activated every soundproofing measure in her office, and was quietly hoping this was all an elaborate prank by the Cultural Studies Department. Casey entered, carrying her coffee and looking mildly apologetic. "Hi, sorry. I didn't break anything, did I? The noodle thing? Or the fainting thing? That Kevaline seemed kind of fragile." "Please," Dean Viren said, gesturing stiffly. "Have a seat." The chair had been hastily reconfigured for human anatomy. The defensive countermeasures, tranquilizer mist, rapid phase containment dome, and species-agnostic sedative foam, had all been quietly disengaged for fear they'd provoke a diplomatic incident. "Can I get you anything?" the dean asked. "Water? Atmospheric calibration? A live protein cube?" "I'm good," Casey said. "Well, more coffee if you've got it." Dean Viren made a note. "Subject exhibits reliance on known Terran stimulant toxin. Possibly metabolic baseline." "Ms. Hart," she began, "we have some questions about your background. Specifically, your, planet of origin." "Earth," Casey replied easily. "Sol system. Third rock from the sun." "Indeed," the dean said faintly. "And you live there?" "Yep. Born and raised in Austin. That's a city in Texas. That's a region on the west side of the continent. Sort of." Dean Viren was silent for a long moment. "You are aware," she said slowly, "that Earth is currently classified as a quarantined red zone biosphere. Galactic contact protocol requires total isolation." "Oh yeah," Casey said, taking a sip. "We figured that out when your broadcasts stopped being purely educational and started including insurance disclaimers." "You intercepted our broadcasts?" "Well, they were just kind of floating around. We pointed some dishes at the sky, picked them up. A few teams at home started decoding the linguistic structures. Realized they weren't natural signals. Kind of a giveaway, really." "You decoded our language?" "Most of it. Enough to read your course catalog anyway. That's how I found out about the exchange program." Dean Viren had gone perfectly still. Her writing stylus hovered in the air, forgotten. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "Are you telling me your species Applied to our academic exchange program on purpose? Yup, Casey said brightly. Thought it'd be cool to study xenobiology somewhere that actually has aliens. Plus, my university back home has a credit transfer agreement. Dean Viren quietly put her stylus down and folded her hands. Ms. Hart, please describe your family. Sure. Let's see. My dad's a mechanical engineer. My mom teaches high school chemistry. My older sister, Sarah's a vet. You know, animal doctor. She's training for a strength competition. Says she wants to deadlift twice her body weight by the end of the year. Dean Viren's nostrils flared slightly. I'm sorry. Twice her body weight? Yeah, that's her hobby. She's really strong. Helped deliver a baby elephant once. Kinda had to reach in and... Stop, the dean said quietly. Please stop. My little cousin Jenny's in med school. Wants to be a trauma surgeon. Of course she does. Casey frowned. You okay? You're looking a little pale. I'm fine, Dean Viren lied. Just reviewing threat matrices. An hour after Casey Hart's interview, 17 Terran vessels arrived in orbital range. The ships did not broadcast weapon systems, territorial claims, or ultimatums. They requested docking instructions and whether the station's coffee facilities were up to Earth standard. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session via encrypted hyperspace relay. Attendance was remote. No one wanted to be physically present at the same coordinates as an approaching human fleet. Council Speaker Nrel Vosk, a three-eyed crystalline delegate whose people could survive stellar core exposure but not stress, opened the session with the traditional phrase, "We are once again extremely concerned." Dean Viren's image flickered on screen from the Arquette Institute. For the record, she said, we were not informed that the Terrans had achieved faster-than-light capability. In our defense, responded the Council's defense chair, neither were we. How many humans are present? Dean Viren checked a data pad. 17 aboard ships. 1 in the cafeteria. Possibly 3 already in the library. There was a silence one could measure in atmospheric pressure. Councillor Tayrix of the Mist Swarm cleared his vocal cloud. Have the humans made demands? They've requested formal enrollment for the other students, Viren said. Oh, and they want to know if the cafeteria takes Terran dietary credits. Something called tap and brew. Speaker Vosk looked ready to crack under his own lattice structure. They're here, he muttered, and they want to pay tuition. Down in what had very recently been the Crisis Management Room, now rebranded the Human Cultural Liaison Office, Casey was showing a group of pale alien researchers video clips from her tablet. This one's called rugby, she explained. Kind of like controlled, full-contact territory skirmishing. Great cardio. Professor Lorat stared at the footage of humans tackling each other in mud. And this is recreational? Oh, yeah, Casey said cheerfully. This is amateur league. Professional stuff is more intense. You should see the extreme sports documentary series my sister's in. She does free solo cliff climbs over ice floes. Why? No real reason. She just likes it. Back in the council chamber, panic had started giving way to weary inevitability. We could reject their applications, someone offered. And then what? Said another. They'll just show up anyway, with better credentials. They don't seem interested in conquest, Councillor Tayrix noted. They just want access to the libraries, and the research departments, and the sports facilities. Speaker Vosk made the decision with a sound like shattering glass. Fine. We admit them, all of them. But we require reinforced dormitories and planetary insurance waivers. 6 standard cycles later, the Arquette Institute of Interspecies Studies became the first galactic campus to officially host a Terran academic cohort. Their programs included Applied Evolutionary Combat Strategy, taught by a human gym teacher, Comparative Immune System Warfare, hosted by an Earth virologist, and Recreational Conflict Theory, which was just a PE class with boxing gloves. Casey Hart became the first human graduate student in the galaxy. Her thesis on cross-species resilience adaptations led to breakthroughs in survival gear, trauma medicine, and planetary colonization methods. She also got her sister admitted. One morning, as Professor Laureate walked alongside Casey across the central plaza, he noticed the construction crews finishing a new wing of the dormitories. "Those are the human safe housing units, correct?" he asked. "Yep," Casey nodded. "Pressure-resistant walls, flexible flooring, emergency caffeine dispensers, and full gym access." Laureate hesitated. "Ms. Hart, is your sister anything like you?" Casey grinned. "Oh no, she's way tougher. You're gonna love her." Professor Laureate said nothing. He just quietly scheduled an extra session with his therapist.